seat as the session will start shortly.
Assalamualaikum. Nama saya Gita Wirawan.
Welcome to our distinguished panelists. Welcome to founder and chairman of FPCI, Pak Dino Patijalal, and also Bu Rosa. Welcome to Studio One. I would like to inform everyone that the current session 3B on climate geopolitics is titled How Geopolitical Developments Are Severely Complicating Our Climate Objectives. The session will be conducted in Bahasa Indonesia, in English, and for those who needs the interpretation device, allow me to change to Bahasa. Bagi mereka yang memerlukan alat penerjemah bisa mengakses alat-alat tersebut di meja yang terdapat di dekat pintu masuk. Everyone please take your seats as we will start the session shortly. Okay. Without further ado, we would like to start the session. We would like to give the floor to our moderator of the session, Romora Edward Sitorus, PhD, Kata Data Green Advisor. We would like to invite Pak Mora to the stage. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. How is everyone doing? Great. I would like to welcome Pak Dino Patijalal as the head of FPCI. Thank you for inviting every one of us. We have a great event here. A lot of things to learn today. So I'm Romora Edward Sitorus. I'm a Kata Data Green Advisor. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome all of you at this exciting session titled How Geopolitical Development Are Severely Complicating Our Climate Objectives. Now before we start, I would like to start with a pantun or quatrain. Global tensions rise so high. Climate goals might pass us by. Seek solutions, do not deny. Clean energy we must try. So indeed, today we are diving deep into a critical conversation. Indonesia's energy transition faces significant challenges due to global geopolitical tensions. Issues like higher tariff, trade barriers could increase the cost of transitioning to clean energy. Now this puts Indonesia, a country still heavily reliant on fossil fuel, at risk of slowing its commitment. Now, domestically, many still view fossil fuel as more reliable and geopolitically stable, which creates resistance against change. However, the reality is Indonesia's need a more secure energy policy so that we could do better in economy. Therefore, in this session, we will discuss how shifting geopoliticals is influencing Indonesia's climate goals. We'll explore opportunities and leverage mechanisms to support industrial growth while reducing emissions. Finally, we'll discuss practical strategies to strengthen energy securities by rapidly scaling up renewable energy deployment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to enrich our discussion today, I'm privileged to have with us distinguished experts and leaders who will help us navigate these critical issues. Our first panelist today is Mr. Gita Wirjawan, an accomplished leader and prominent statesman who truly needs no introduction. He is currently a visiting scholar at Precourt Institute of Energy, Stanford University, and is widely recognized as the host of educational podcasts Endgame with Gita Wirjawan. Pak Gita has previously served Indonesia as a Minister of Trade and head of the Indonesia Investment Coordinating Board. He has extensive experience in finance, having held senior position at leading global financial institutions, including JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Citibank. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in warmly welcoming Mr. Gita Wirjawan to the stage. Please be seated. Our second panelist today is Ms. Tiza Mafira, Director of Climate Policy Initiative. She is a renowned expert in environmental law and climate policy, recognized for driving significant change through policy and advocacy. Ms. Tiza co-founded and leads Indonesia Plastic Bag Diet movement, successfully pushing for plastic bag bans across more than 50 cities, including Jakarta and Bali. Her impactful work has earned her many prestigious awards, including recognition as a United Nations Ocean Hero. With great pleasure, I'd like to invite Ms. Tiza Mafira to come forward. Please. Our third panelist today is Mr. Matt Webb, Associate Director for Global Clean Power Diplomacy at E3G. Matt is a key figure in global climate diplomacy, known for driving ambitious international commitment to accelerate the global energy transition. He played a central role in achieving the coal phase-down agreement at COP26 and were instrumental in launching the groundbreaking Just Energy Transition Partnership with South Africa. It's an honor to invite Matt Webb to join us on stage. Our final panelist today is Ms. Sharon Sia, Senior Fellow and Coordinator of Climate Change in Southeast Asia Program at ISEA's Yusof Ishak Institute. Ms. Sia brings extensive diplomatic experience from her career with the Singapore Ministry of Foreign Affairs and is a leading voice on climate issues in Southeast Asia. She currently spearheads influential research initiative, notably Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Survey, and shaping in understanding of climate change and opportunity. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Sharon to the stage. It's great to have such a global, diverse and experienced group of experts and leaders with us today. Thank you all for being here. I know our audience is eager to hear your thoughts and insights. Now let's dive into our panel discussion. We'll structure this conversation in several rounds to explore today's key issues. To kick off, the first round we will take a closer look at the global climate landscape and understand where Indonesia stands within this picture. We'll start with Pak Gita. Pak Gita, with your extensive experience both globally and here in Indonesia, could you share your perspective on the current global climate energy landscape, especially considering the escalating geopolitical tensions, trade disruptions, and the growing concerns around national energy security?
Thank you, Romora, for the opportunity to be here, and Pak Dino and the foreign policy community for allowing me to speak on this occasion. I think if one were to go back to recent years where there might have been an apparent type of unilateralism coming from, call it the United States, this, I think, would have been a result of many things. One of which is arguably the fact that ideas and conversations have been polarized, which have consequently resulted in highly uncomfortable economic inequalities. And at the same time, there's been a relatively high degree of revisionism that's been asserted and exerted by countries that would have been tiny not too long ago, but at the moment much less tinier. Call it the BRICS, that have the wherewithal to project technological capital, but also economic capital, but also geopolitical capital. So this revisionism, I think, has caused a little bit of discomfort within the very institution, power that has pretty much underwritten the international world order for decades. And this underwriting that has been single-handedly done is somewhat rubbed by this revisionist forces. This, I think, has caused what I call the shifting of a much unstructured type of multipolarity to a much more structured type of multipolarity. The type of multipolarity that I think allows one to better define who gets to be the enemy, who gets to be the friend, and who gets to be the swinger, right? And I'm in the camp that truly believes that Indonesia, on a bigger scale, Southeast Asia, deserve to be a swing region by way of the sheer scale and diversity. Scale being defined by population at 700 million, and scale being defined by economic size at about $4 trillion worth of goods and services as of 2024. That situates Southeast Asia, I think, comfortably at a place where we can swing to any which way we want. And this is empirically manifested in our ability to embrace a West-centric type of architecture, but also at the same time, a China-centric type of architecture. Call it the BRICS, which we've just joined officially on the 6th of January, 2025. This is a continuation of the type of optionality that we asserted and exerted as early as 1955 at the Bandung Asia Africa Conference, more clearly punctuated in 1961 at the non-aligned, and more clearly punctuated at subsequent international era, event, and arena. So going forward, I do see the swinging wherewithal of Indonesia and Southeast Asia being not only empowered, but also manifested very clearly in our ability to look at China increasingly more for technological capital allocation. This is not because China is a great 0 to 1 narrative, but China is clearly a 1 to the next digit type of narrative. They know how to make goods and services more cheaply, and cheap resonates with not only Indonesians who earn $5,000 per capita per year, but those friends in Southeast Asia from Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia that earn less than $2,000. Less cheap is probably the Singaporeans, because they earn $91,000 per capita per year. But for the most part, Southeast Asia, I think, will look at a technological capital allocator in a more efficient, effective manner. At the same time, I think Southeast Asia will look at the West more as a 0 to 1, but that 1 is much more expensive than the next digit that's being procured and underwritten by China. And that 1 is not going to arrive in Southeast Asia at the kind of scale, speed that the technological capital will arrive in Southeast Asia. And this is empirically manifested. If we saw the collective trade between China and Southeast Asia in 2024, that would have been about $1 trillion. That between Southeast Asia and the US would have been about $530 billion. That train has left the station with greater velocity and greater acceleration. So we will look at China as an indispensable allocator of technological capital, the West as an indispensable economic capital allocator. But we have to be deft in combining these two differing perspectives for purposes of our moving up the value chain, moving up the global geopolitical order, and being able to expand upon our pre-existing strategic autonomy. But that requires sheer investment in education. How do we work up our score in PISA? How do we work up our intellectual property coming out of the campuses? Southeast Asia has 8,000 campuses with 19 million students, whereas China only has 2,600 campuses with about 39 million students. But clearly, the intellectual property coming out of the 2,600 campuses is much more pronounced. You all are using it, the OPPOs and the BYDs, right? So until and unless we invest so that we can actually show educational attainment at the non-tertiary level and at the tertiary level, I think we're not going to be equipped to be deft in embracing the narrative of technological capital allocation from China and the narrative of economic capital allocation from the West. Now, last, I just want to say that for us to actually attain carbon neutrality by 2050 or 2060, the carbon sink in 2018 would have been a little over 400 gigatons. This would have been as per the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Climate Change, as related to the United Nations. As of today, that carbon sink is slightly less than 200 gigatons. And we emit about 40 gigatons of carbon every year. So at that rate, that carbon sink is going to vanish even before 2030. That doesn't reconcile well with our aspiration to attain carbon neutrality by 2050. Now, if we were to build renewable capabilities as to modernize the region of Southeast Asia, we've got to build at least 1 terawatt worth of power generation capabilities. We have a pre-existing power generation capability of about 400,000 megawatts. To build an additional terawatt, it's going to require $2 to $3 trillion. That's not going to happen domestically. Why? Because economically, we're not blessed with the kind of economic space that we need to have. Fiscal space-wise, our tax ratios are only 10 to 16%, much lower than what the levels are with its OECD countries at 33%. From a monetary space standpoint, our monetary supply to GDP ratios in big countries in Southeast Asia, inclusive of Indonesia, at 45%. Laos, 60%. Philippines, 80%, when it's actually supposed to be at least 100%. Singapore is at more than 200%. So in the absence of domestic prevailing economic spaces, the inevitable way is to source it from outside. This is where the West comes in. The West is blessed with $140 trillion worth of liquidity that would have to inevitably be diversified away on the back of rising risk premium. The reason why it's only coming to Singapore disproportionately more than it comes to the other 9 countries in Southeast Asia is because of 2 things. Number 1, our lack of ability to uphold what needs to be upheld. That's called the rule of law, penegakan hukum. The second is our inability to translate uncertainties into risks. Uncertainties are unknown unknowns, whereas risks are known unknowns. Risks are scenarios that you can assign probabilities. Case in point, if you have $100 million and you want to invest in some part of the nation, you tell that guy you've got $100 million. If that guy can tell you there is a 68% probability that there's going to be a blackout for 3 months in a year, to the extent it happens, it's going to have an impact of 18% to your top line, 12% on your bottom line. I call that risk because it can be quantified can be measured, it can be predicted, and it can be priced. You go to another place in Southeast Asia, you carry $100 million, you want to build a factory using renewabilities, and you ask, dude, what's going to happen? And the guy or the girl will say, Inshallah, there won't be a blackout. I call that uncertainty. So we need to learn to assign and create probabilistic scenarios that will be able to be better quantified, measured, predicted, and priced. To the extent we can deliver on the rule of law, to the extent we can deliver on being able to be translational from uncertainties to risks, I think we're good to go in terms of embracing the technological capital narrative from China and embracing the economic capital narrative from the West. On that basis, doing it deftly, I think we can see a much brighter future.
Wow. Thank you, Pak Gita Wirjawan, for the very comprehensive take on this geopolitical issue. You mentioned about many countries, including Indonesia, has to choose between enemy or friends or swinger, and we have to use our governance as well as risk quantification to manage this. Thank you, Pak Gita. Matt, I would like to move to you, building on Pak Gita's points. From your point of view, how would you characterize the current global climate outlook, and how does geopolitical dynamics shape the progress on global energy transition?
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here, so thank you so much for the invitation, FCPI, to this wonderful summit, and great to be on such an esteemed panel. Just to build on Gita's comment, I think I'm going to give you the takeaway and then do some of the points. I think even with the challenges and distractions, we've got to make sure that we seize the opportunities that are opening up, not to think about the energy transition, but how, where we're going to get to in terms of economic opportunity, growth, and a stable climate. So I think I'm giving you almost the summary before I go into the points. I think, yes, there are some significant challenges. I think, I'm going to list 2 or 3 here that you've touched upon. We've seen fundamentally the vulnerability in many countries of having a fossil fuel-based system. So in the UK and Europe, obviously we had the price impacts from Russia's aggression in Ukraine. I noted from the UNSG's report earlier this week, I think it was averaged, the price shock was an average of about 20% globally. But in the UK, it was, we were paying 3 times the energy bill. So the fragility and the risk associated with our existing energy system have been revealed, and that's brought a great nervousness to the concept of energy security, full stop. And of course, that's made policymakers think, well, hang on, what is the basis of our bridge across to clean energy? And that's brought a greater scrutiny, of course, to the dominance that China has now in the clean energy supply chain. China has invested its economy. It's electrifying its industry. It's producing prodigious amounts of renewable energy technology. But at the moment, 80% of the mineral processing and supply components is from there. So the moment of reckoning where we realized, in the UK and Europe that we were very weak on fossil fuels, and at the same time this realization that the future, we needed to change the future in terms of our dependency on clean energy. It meant that we were trying to bridge the gap between 2 quite difficult energy systems. Of course, we've then had the change of the US administration, and trade was a stable, relatively stable pastime for a decade or more, and suddenly we've been faced with an upending of trade agreements, tariffs, and of course that affects that same global supply chain. So again, an indirect implication again onto where those clean energy parts were coming from, and of course, when you bring that together, I think one of the really fundamental things is that it's demonstrated the great interdependency for our pathway to get to a safe climate. So E3, for those that don't know E3G, our central mission is a safe climate for all. That is the simple purpose we have as a not-for-profit. So it's, that makes our thinking quite focused in that regard, I guess. But the cost of the transition within the UK and the EU is directly dependent upon, at the moment, technological capability in China, and in the future we're going to have to make that more stable and more diverse. What we can't afford to cut off the availability of that cheap technology right now. We do not have the time. I'm glad Geeta quoted the numbers for the carbon budget. We do not have time for the world order to settle down. The snow globe, we can't wait for it to settle in a new world order or the next US administration. The clock is ticking. So we have to do what we do now, we have to buy what we can now, but also we have to work to diversify and make sure that globally we are confident in a clean energy supply market. That then brings great opportunities. I think slightly hidden behind all of this, actually, and I'm just thinking about the references to the great ambition that your president has expressed for renewable deployment. Just about the time, so before we got to the global renewable energy and energy efficiency goals, we took over 60 years to get the first terawatt hour of solar generation. Between 2022 and 2024, in these last 2 years, while we've been facing increasing turmoil, the world installed the next terawatt hour, in just 2 years. So hidden behind all of this is, policymakers are not coping with the exponential availability of solar panels, solar PV, building power stations in factories. And that paradigm, what was unthinkable 2 years ago is now is actually easily achievable today. So I think that, that spirit is, that's come through. And I guess the other thing I was going to mention was also, yes, the US have, indicated they were withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. But actually, if you look at the response of countries such as Indonesia and others, and China and the EU, I was noticing the EU statement from Thursday, which had a specific reference to boosting renewable deployment and working with developing economies to share the benefits. Actually, I think the US position, it's going to slow down the transition in the US, but actually, if you look at the way in which their positioning on clean energy and fossils was received at our recent London Summit on Energy Security, they were very much in isolation. So I think the signs are that we are going to carry on. And I think we need to sort of conclude here, we need to use this new, more multipolar arrangement, this new appetite to cement new trade deals. I noticed we are already seeing signs that people are using trade to drive climate. And again, that was another message from the UNSC's address. I saw that Indonesia and the EU finally agreed the EU CEPA agreement after 10 years. The EU and India actually, Modi was in London just this week, concluding what was 3 years, very difficult 3 years of trade negotiations. These new agreements, these new bilateral arrangements between, whether you call them middle powers or whatever you want to refer them to, can actually drive the transition. So I think if we can seize that opportunity, I think there is a way of taking these impacts and implications that we've seen over the last couple of years and actually getting the progress we need to see. There we go.
Thank you, Matt. I quote Matt saying that we cannot wait for the world order to settle to diversify our energy policy. Now, I'm going to turn to Tiza, as highlighted by Pak Gita and Matt. How effectively is or should Indonesia adapt its climate policy given the global uncertainties, like Pak Gita mentioned, to leverage Western economic capital as well as China technology capital? How should we try to adapt our policies according to this new situation?
Thank you, Romora, for the question. And I believe that if Indonesia is going to be a swinger, but a confident swinger, and going to be player in the geopolitical dynamics that is to be reckoned with, then we need to have character as a nation, and that we need to assert our position very strongly. And I'm going to say that at least Indonesia needs to work on 3 things to assert its character. 1, money. 2, markets. And 3, targets. Okay, I'll go through one by one. So first of all, money, right? Don't rely on foreign aid. Nothing frustrates me more than the government of Indonesia or certain officials saying, if we don't get foreign aid, we are not going to do what we need to do, right? Yes, foreign powers have responsibility to pay for the climate damage that they've done. But we, the country, has a responsibility to get done what it needs to get done, right? To ensure we have a healthy, prosperous economy. And there's a few reasons why I'm saying we shouldn't rely on foreign aid. Number one, foreign aid is decreasing. The United States, boom, gone. The European countries, they're shifting their foreign aid into their defense. It's likely that $2 billion of foreign aid will be reduced going into Southeast Asia by next year. But also, there is less foreign aid going into things like giving grants to renewable energy. Why? Because renewable energy is commercial. It's cheap, the technology is everywhere, there's a surplus of technology, thanks to China. And so increasingly, it is being looked at as something that the private sector can handle, and that foreign aid, as in development aid, as in grants, does not need to handle, right? And so the second reason why we shouldn't rely on foreign aid is because it's unnecessary. In Indonesia, renewable energy has been financed mostly by the commercial sector, private commercial banks. 64% of renewable energy financing in Indonesia is handled by domestic private banks. This is commercial equity, commercial capital, which shows that already the private sector in Indonesia views this as something that's worth investing in. So the fact that it's not a bigger size of an investment is mostly down to them just not finding the projects that they actually want to finance, right? And the third reason, well, of course the question is then, well, what does the government just not chip in anything? Can the government say, okay, the private sector can handle everything from now on? Not necessarily. So the government still needs to chip in, but they can focus on things like upskilling the workforce, making sure that Indonesia's labor, investing in education, to make sure that Indonesia's workforce is ready for this technological change that's about to upend our entire energy system, because it will. Yeah. You don't want to have oil lamps when everybody else is already using light bulbs, right? You don't want to be using horses when everybody else is already using cars, right? So this is going to happen, this energy revolution, and our workforce needs to be ready for it. But is our government investing in the education necessary for that? So that's what the government needs to be focusing on. Markets, right? We need to level the playing field for renewable energy to be able to compete with the currently predominant coal source of energy. The problem is that with the state utility PLN now buying coal at the artificial lowered price of $70 per ton, despite the market price being $100, $150, $250 per ton, that is creating a distortion in the market, right? And renewables, they don't get this same kind of privilege. They don't get this kind of subsidy, this kind of, tariff privilege. They don't get that. So yes, they are commercial, but as soon as they enter Indonesia, they're not entering a level playing field. And sometimes in Indonesia, there's a debate around, are we neoliberal? Are we libertarian? Are we socialist? Are we communist? But I think Indonesia doesn't know what it is, right? Because at some point, and on the one hand, we are seriously investing in making sure the state has a large amount of capital through its state-owned enterprises, right? But at the other hand, Indonesia is saying, we want markets, we want investments from the United States, we want technology from China. Believe me, if the market has a level playing field, those investments from the United States will come. Those technology, those greenfield investments from China will come. But we need to be, pretty clear that we're leveling, that we care about a competitive market. Third, targets. Targets have to be sacred. We can't just be banding about targets and not meeting them. Okay, PLN just issued its electrification plan. It has a high ambition of 35% renewable energy by 2034. That's 17 gigawatts of solar PV. 17 gigawatts of solar PV, and today, how many solar PV capacity do we have? Less than 1 gigawatts, okay? So the previous target was by now, which is 2025, we should be at 23% renewable energy, but now we're at 13% renewable energy. 2 weeks after PLN issued this electrification plan, President Prabowo mentioned in a public stage that he believes Indonesia can achieve 100% renewable energy by 2035. 100%. I'm happy with 100%, but what do these targets mean if nobody's meeting them? Okay? There comes a point where we can't be carelessly saying these targets and then for rendering them meaningless, because whenever we don't meet them, we revise them. That's the kind of revisionism that I do not like. It's a different kind of revisionism from what Pagita said earlier. But it is revisionist because we keep revising targets when we don't meet them. Now, we need to be really clear what our targets are. We need to be saying that to the world, right? And we need to be showing the world that we are meeting them and serious about meeting them. And I think there, when Indonesia has a strong stance on its money, on investing its own domestic capital, a strong stance on markets, and a strong stance on reaching its targets, I think that Indonesia would be a really strong presence in the geopolitical scene.
Thank you so much, Tiza, for the perspective. Money, market, and targets. It's very important for Indonesia to further its transition plan. Now I'm going to turn to Sharon. Sharon, Indonesia is one of the largest economy in ASEAN, Southeast Asia. Learning from what Tiza has mentioned about what we should have to further our domestic transition plan, what can Indonesia do for a bigger or for a larger region like Southeast Asia? What unique opportunities and challenges would Indonesia face in exerting its influence to further transition plan in Southeast Asia?
First of all, thank you, Romero, for having me on this panel, and thank you to Pak Dino and the FPCI for inviting me. You're an influential voice in Southeast Asia, and I believe that a lot of that has been discussed will be pondered over, hopefully by the policymakers. I can't agree more with all that you've said. I want to share with you actually the brief that you've given me actually relates a lot to how Indonesians consider and think about climate action in your own country. And Romero, you mentioned earlier that my institute does public perception survey, and you would like to know actually that last year 61.5% of Indonesians believe that your country can play a climate leadership role. And yet, when we look at other indicators to discover Indonesians' confidence for saying this, we find that this picture is rather muddled. In fact, only under 20% of Indonesians believe that the government is doing something to tackle climate change. That means over 80% of Indonesians don't think that the government is doing enough, hasn't been paying enough attention, hasn't been allocating resources to this problem of climate change. And very sadly, nearly 7 in 10 Indonesians believe that climate change will negatively affect their lives in 10 years. I think if you have been going through all the floods, going through all the fires, you will agree that every one of us has been impacted by climate change by now. So no longer a future threat, but actually a present threat. When it comes to bearing the cost of climate change, nearly 60% say the government should bear the cost, not industry and not the individual. So this is very interesting. What does this tell us about Indonesian public perception? Actually, firstly, Indonesians believe that climate change is already threatening them. Second, they believe that there should be strong governmental action. So there are certain things that only government can do. The individual can't do, industry can't do. What can government do? Set policies right. And as Tiza said, set the targets, make it clear, and don't make it a revisionist target. And thirdly, Indonesians believe that the government, followed by the private sector, are actually the two most significant stakeholders who should pay for the cost of climate change. When it comes to leadership, 4 in 10 ASEAN citizens actually view Singapore as a potential climate leader. Indonesia comes in second place at 12.3%, Thailand at third place. So taking aside the 61.5% of Indonesians who believe that your own country can play a leadership role, actually your biggest supporter in the region are the Singaporeans. The Singaporeans, nearly a quarter of the Singaporeans say that Indonesia must play a bigger role. Why? Because Singaporeans are very pragmatic. They believe that size matters. You're the biggest country, the biggest economy, therefore, the bigger you are, the bigger the impact, and the greater the soft power. So do know this, Singaporeans are rooting for Indonesia to take more climate action. And to move on to ASEAN climate action, actually, ASEAN has done quite a lot, but still not enough. All the ASEAN members have signed on to the Paris Agreement. They have submitted their first NDCs. And this morning we heard from the minister that Indonesia will be submitting your second NDC with enhanced ambition. So I'm really looking forward to that because I believe that Indonesia will set the template and also set the momentum for the region to continue to meet up to their climate ambition. And then talking about momentum, we have a momentum towards realizing an ASEAN power grid. So this really relates to whatever Indonesia is doing. And also earlier in this morning's panel, there's been an excess of electricity that was created. And that may have played a part in hampering your ambition to deploy more renewable energy. So having a power grid means that there's an escape valve for Indonesia if you connect up with the rest of Southeast Asia to be able to sell electricity across borders. And additionally, ASEAN has also been working on a taxonomy to guide businesses and investment decisions, albeit voluntary at the moment, but hopefully, as Pak Gita has mentioned, to uphold the rule of law would mean to make it more mandatory in time to come. And we have also been talking about a regional carbon trading framework. So what can Indonesia do? You can definitely bridge these gaps by championing regional policy harmonization. And I think 3 things you can do. 1, use your diplomatic heft. You have a lot of it, and you have persuasive powers to do that. You can leverage your influence to mobilize stronger commitments to phase out coal and to expand on renewables, and advocate for integrated supply chain. Second, in embracing that technological allocation from China. And in fact, I think as a swing region, as Pak Gita mentioned, we should be agnostic to wherever technology comes from. What Indonesia can do is to position yourself as a renewable technology manufacturing hub and accelerate this diffusion of clean tech. And what you can do instead of all of us worrying about the tariffs coming from the US, we could perhaps think about pooling our resources and creating special ASEAN clean tech manufacturing hubs. And for Indonesia, you have a particularly useful leverage, which is your leverage in critical minerals, and you can use that to great advantage. And other ASEAN member countries also have comparative advantages. For instance, Singapore in the financial space would be able to leverage that influence to attract new capital, new tech, create new innovative ways of blending finance, and to develop this into a dedicated ASEAN clean tech hub. But of course, in your transition journey, as you earlier mentioned, you have to train our ASEAN population to be able to take up these jobs. That's part of the just transition. And the third one is for green financing. You have already demonstrated leadership in innovative financing mechanisms, such as issuing your sovereign sukuk and enabling other regulations for green bonds. So the next step will really be to expand these financing models through ASEAN-wide initiatives. A final note on Indonesia, though, and I feel that this is quite important to say, which is that as we move towards a more collective form of regional action, we need a carbon tax. And I know that your policymakers have been thinking about it, but there's a certain fear holding back because you think that it would make Indonesia uncompetitive. So while it's good for us to think about going into voluntary carbon markets, we still need to price in carbon. It would be useless to think that emitting a ton of carbon in other parts of Southeast Asia will be cheaper than, say, emitting it in Singapore or in Indonesia. We need to have a carbon tax so that it levels the playing field. And overall, you will make ASEAN as a region more competitive, not less. So on that, I think I'll just end here. And I think there's a lot for Indonesia to chew on and to bring the region forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. You bring a lot of very important recipes for Indonesia to take leadership role. I find two things interesting, that actually neighboring countries are rooting for Indonesia leadership. And the second is Indonesia should be more pragmatic. Now, I would like to, coming back to TISA on these matters, we are expected to have a leadership role, but domestically, we have our own problem. We have a large fuel subsidies, and we need to reform them, but how should we reform them to create an equitable and supportive clean energy transition? Please kindly share your insight on this.
Okay. First of all, I think we need to acknowledge the subsidies are inefficient. The thing that we think are providing equitable results are actually not. And I will give you the receipts, okay? In the state budget report of 2023, you can see that the current revenues coming in from the fossil fuel companies to the state budget is about 13% of the entire revenue pool. But the money going out for fossil fuel subsidies is 16% of the entire revenue pool, right? So we are getting less than we are spending. That is inefficient. That is the definition of inefficient. And what are these fossil fuel subsidies? You might think, okay, but that helps me have cheaper electricity prices, so that's okay. Actually, the fossil fuel subsidies are not directly given to you as individuals, right? There's electricity subsidies, there's BBM, fuel subsidies, and there are compensations. Now, 370 trillion rupiah is given to state-owned enterprises. How many are given to direct? 90 trillion. So 90 trillion only is in the form of BLT, bantuan langsung tunai, kartu pintar, kartu miskin, you know, that kind of thing that you actually get to enjoy directly. 371 trillion goes out to PLN, goes out to Pertamina, right? And this is a form of market distortion, as I said before. The problem with that is that it is going out to support fossil fuels like diesel and coal, whereas what we could talk about when we talk about subsidy reform is we talk about shifting those subsidies away from dirty, away from indirect, towards clean and direct, right? So that, for example, everyone who wants to put up a solar panel in their home with a battery installed should be able to get a subsidy for that. Why not? Take it away from the subsidy that's provided to the state-owned enterprises, give it directly to the people, and let them choose their form of clean energy. That is entirely possible. So there is a form of subsidy reform that doesn't have to raise the shackles of the people. Another form of carbon tax, I wanted to take on the challenge of carbon tax, because the government has been talking about carbon tax for a while. It has never been actually enacted because the fear of controversy around carbon tax. There have been other countries who have placed carbon tax without, you know, going through these going through unrest in the society. The way they did it, and this is Sweden, this is other countries, is that they reduced other taxes. They reduced, for example, income tax. They reduced corporate tax. They raised carbon tax. So now, if you're a company, if you're a small, medium enterprise, you are getting taxed less as long as you are a low carbon, small, medium enterprise. If you are a big company and you have just invested $1 billion into renewable energy, you will get taxed less. And if you are a big company that's just invested $1 billion into a petrochemical company, you will be taxed more. That's it, right? And that way, some people will not be happy, but that's the fossil fuel companies, that's the carbon heavy companies, and they need to reform, and they will be pushed to reform. So there are ways to talk about carbon tax, about tax reform, about subsidy reform that's a little bit more nuanced. But I feel like right now, the government tends to shut down all of those discussions because they just don't want to talk about it at all. And I think that's a shame, because I think there are ways to shift it so that we still protect the bottom line of the poor and the middle class in our country.
Thank you, Tisa, for sharing that many of challenges can be converted into opportunities if we do it in a smart way. Pak Gita, I would like to turn to you now. I would like to discuss about the impact of trade tensions on our exports and in what way we can navigate this. For example, our export industries, especially steel and cement, face growing pressure from international carbon-related trade measures. In your view, what kind of policies could Indonesia adopt to effectively transform this pressure into opportunities for accelerated decarbonization while still remaining economically competitive?
I want to pick up on whatever the other panelists have articulated. I completely embrace everything that's been articulated, but I want to try to infuse some political realism and economic realism. Bear in mind that 88% of the households in Indonesia are headed up by somebody or anybody without a tertiary education. Bear in mind that 93% of the electorate doesn't have a university education or tertiary education. So when we complain about policymakers or politicians, keep in mind that they don't come from planet Mars. They come from ourselves. That's the first political realism. The second is the economic realism that I want to inject into the conversations here, which I think could be value additive. When one talks about subsidization, it comes from the fiscal space. And the fiscal space is manifested only to the extent of about 10% of the GDP, disproportionately much lower than a typical OECD. So if the government were to choose where to send that subsidy to, that politician, that policymaker will remember who helped them when they were campaigning. And it's unfortunate that those that would have been in a position of assisting would have been mostly within the fossil space, right? And when you use your ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, or even DeepSeek, keep in mind that the energy usage is 10 to 50 times compared to a simple search on Google. When one of you or some of you were to use Sora, which is a platform that creates a sophisticatedly generated AI image, it uses 1,000 to 5,000 times more energy than a simple search on Google. And this explains why we exported 250 million tons of coal to China out of the 800 million tons of coal produced. So this is the kind of realism that you need to be cognizant of. China built a lot more renewable energy than anybody else on Earth last year. But China built 43,000 megawatts worth of power generation using coal, 13 times more than Indonesia built. which is about 3 to 4,000. So that's the kind of realism that I think we need to be conscious and cognizant of. Now, as it relates to trade posturing, CBAM, which was postured by the Europeans, is a China-containing rhetoric, is a China-containing narrative. It's not an Indonesia-containing narrative. And I'll explain why. Anybody here know how much the consumption of steel in Indonesia is on a per capita per year basis? It's 80 kilograms. 80 kilograms of steel consumption on a per capita per year basis. You know how much it takes for any nation on planet Earth to be a modern nation? It needs to consume 500 kilograms of steel on a per capita per year basis. You know how much is required to go up from 80 to 500 in terms of capacity that needs to be built? You know how much money is required? So if the Europeans are telling us through the CBAM posture that we can't export steel, that's counterintuitive. Because we need all the steel we have to produce for ourselves. Why would we export to anywhere else? Because we're still less than modern. Because we're only consuming 80 kilograms of steel. And all the other items in the list of CBAM are related to a China-containing posture. So you have to be deft in navigating through the international web, in understanding where this is directed to. It's blanketed as if it's directed at everybody else, but it's actually directed at China. And the insecurity with China is not with respect to technology. It's not with respect to economics. I think it's more and more clearly with respect to psychology. Imagine a country upon independence in 1945 was only 2% of the global GDP, and as of today, it's more than 20% of the global GDP. At the end of World War II, the United States was 50% of the global GDP. Today, it's only 26% of the GDP. Put yourself in the positions of China and the US. If you were 50% of the economy of this room, and all of a sudden in a few decades, you're 26%, and you know this other kid in the room that was only 2% of the global GDP of this room, and now is 20-something% of the economy or economic size of this room, it creates a psychological insecurity. And unfortunately, it's manifested in some aberrations that I think are very difficult to comprehend. But it requires educational attainment. If only 12% of the households have a university education, it's going to be very difficult for us to move up the value chain. So we've got to invest in education so that we can move up the value chain, move up the global geopolitical order, so we can tell our stories. We're not telling stories enough. Out of the 140 million books that would have been published since the printing press was discovered in the middle part of the 15th century, I know, thumbs up. But this is important. This is important. Only 375,000 books have been narrated about Southeast Asia. Imagine, for a region that represents 9% of the global population, it's narrated only to the extent of 0.26% of all the books published. Does that make any sense to you? It doesn't, to me at least. It means we're not telling stories to ourselves, much less to the rest of the world. So if you can't tell stories to yourselves and to the world, it's going to be more difficult to explain what we need to counter with respect to some posturing called CBAM.
Wow.
You can clap.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Pak Gita, for bringing us back to reality, giving us the right perspective of looking at problems. And I'm very much enlightened by all the panelists here. I have a lot more questions. However, time is up. I'm sorry, guys. Maybe next time we'll have another session like this, Pak Dino, and we can ask all these interesting questions to our insightful leaders and experts. But now it's time for Q&A. I'll get 2 questions from the floor please mention your name, affiliation, and specify which panelists are you asking this question for. Yes. Yeah. Yes, yes, you. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Thank you for the time. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ega. I'm from the University of Muhammadiyah, Yogyakarta. Now, allow me to dive a little deeper in the question of critical minerals. Now, you did mention there in the presentation about the dominance of China in controlling over 90% of critical minerals. Now, I understand not all countries are in any compulsory or tasked to handle the refining or the supply chain of these minerals, but we should understand that all technologies related to green industries, to some extent in the future, maybe not now, will have to exhaust a lot of critical minerals. Now, as far as I understand here, there is a decadal view in China's industrial policy that leads them to where they are today. The fact that we are now facing not necessarily rare in mineral supplies in terms of raw, but we fail to uphold a vertical supply chain in this sector, not because we do not care about the future of our economy or green industry or circular economy, but because the environmental effect it causes to our environment. Something, a heavy task that China had taken due to historical context. They wanted to take this. Now, my question is a little bit of context. Just to give the gravity situation here, in terms of green technologies that are available commercially, like green turbines, they require magnets, right? They require magnets, permanent magnets, the battery called lithium, which in refining capacity is 90% controlled by China. Now, we have seen multiple alternatives globally available in Canada, Australia. However, they have to be taken to China again for
Can you
refining
guys
process.
go straight to the question,
Okay.
please?
Now, okay, let's make it simple. Should we, Indonesia, focus on this regard, on this critical mineral regard, or should we be subservient to, completely relying on China and the currently existing geopolitical conditions on critical mineral trade? That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. One more question? Yes. Yes, you please. Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Davina Septiani Putri from Universitas Pelita Harapan. Thank you for the opportunity. I believe that as individuals, especially Gen Z, many of us are eager to contribute to reaching net zero. But in reality, it's often not our personal efforts that are lacking. Instead, it's the lack of transparency and policies that we, the public, don't always have access to or influence over. Sometimes it feels like our individual actions are limited or even undermined by politics or government policies aligned with sustainability goals for the goodness of Southeast Asia and for the rest of the world. I think my question is for Ms. Sharon. So my question is, as Gen Z, do you think our main role should be to continue doing what we can on individual level, or should we start focusing more on pressuring governments to make the systemic changes needed? What's the most impactful path for us, given this limitation? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good question. All of you have a very good English. Thank you so much. So I would pose the first question to Ms. Sharon. For the first question, you are asking that to which panelists, sir? Oh, you happy to answer? Okay. Okay. Sure, Pak. Yeah, Pak Gita. Maybe Sharon first. Okay. For the second question, it seems that everyone tried to to further sustainability, but they feel hopeless because of intransparency. Do you have any suggestion on how to?
Yeah, that's the biggest worry actually of Gen Z. You start from a point of hope, and then over time you become disillusioned, and then it becomes hopeless. I mean, you know, Greta Thunberg has grown up, you know. We've seen her over the last 10, 15 years. She was a little girl, and now she's a young woman. And you wonder to yourself, what have we done in this time?
Right.
But back to Southeast Asia, we have a very interesting phenomenon. In the last 2 to 3 years, this region has had change of governments. Almost every year we've had major elections. Indonesia just had yours last year. But guess what? None of the elections have climate as an agenda. None of the politicians have made climate their rallying point because they think that the bread and butter issues are more important to their population. Are they mistaken? I don't know. You are the populace, you are the electorate. The electorate has to tell the politicians whether a climate agenda is important to them. But of course, you know, in some countries it's not so easy where there are not even elections. So you have to, I always tell this to the, you know, middle school kids that when I give a talk, what can you do? Because you feel so powerless, you're unable to do anything. Go and talk to your MP, talk to your teachers, make your views known. I think also with the use of social media, there are many opportunities for the youth to make your views known to those who are in positions of power, of influence. And of course, there are other little things you can do. I mean, Ms. Tiza has co-founded an anti-plastics movement. That's really encouraging. I know that in Indonesia, there are many of these, of the CSOs. And so don't believe the anti-narrative that personal action is not important. We have gone through a cycle where there were academics who said that, why does it matter? What you do is just a drop in the ocean, right? You really should be looking for big governmental action. I still personally believe that individual action can make a difference. And if we don't believe in that anymore, then all hope is lost. So chin up. I think you've asked a very good question. And start with your own circle back home.
Thank you, Sharon. Matt, you want to add?
I was more going to come in on the critical minerals one, but
Okay,
you
yeah,
said maybe.
you can.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to loop a couple of things together here. I think your point about critical minerals is absolutely spot on. I've seen no indication that, despite the political rhetoric about the dominance of China in the supply chain, that there's any sign in the investment dynamics or diversification in the market that the market's doing anything about it. And we don't have time to think well, let's just wait on our transition for 10 years while we set up a completely new supply chain. So this comes back to, you know, we're all facing a common dilemma here. How do we compete and collaborate? What are we going to lead on, and what are we going to do? And I think Indonesia, with its experience with dealing with the EU and the G7 on the JETP and its very close ties with China, you know, has the chance to demonstrate how to be. I loved your word, deft. That is a great word. I mean, the eyes are on Indonesia to be deft and show how it's going to take what it needs, but also make what it wants to make and increase its economic value within its society. They are difficult decisions, but all countries are facing them. Indonesia has the ability and has shown the ability to lead. Through your G20 leadership, you were the first G20 after Glasgow to recognise the coal phase down within your text. Actually, a place where Indonesia can not only show how it's making decisions about supply chains, making and taking, it can show those decisions through the G20. We've gone from Indonesia to Brazil to India to South Africa. We've actually got a very difficult year next year in the G20. So there is an opportunity for Indonesia to demonstrate how it's being deft and, you know, take those hard decisions. It's no good saying we're going to be fully renewable by 2035 if we don't decide how we're going to use that renewable energy to displace the coal that's still being built for the nickel smelting, which is probably going in supply chains to China. So Indonesia can be deft. It also has to be courageous. I believe it has the ability to do that, and tackle not just the renewable deployment, but those really difficult questions as to how they're going to displace coal from the economy. Nickel can be made by electrification, as far as I understand. I used to be a chemist years ago, anymore. And then, very final thing, on this message, I think there is a massive opportunity for Indonesia to show this spirit and show this leadership as we come to this critical 5-year COP. We have to show how the Paris Agreement has delivered from being near 4 degrees warming. Glasgow, we were near a 2.7 to 3. We need strong NDCs and we need a strong action plan to say that we are going to achieve what we've set out to do, which is 1.5 to 2 degrees. And Indonesia's courage and spirit and leadership can help break down some of those barriers within the negotiations and show how we're going to deliver and implement on the targets we've set ourselves. Sorry, I've elaborated a bit, but your question was a great kicking off point.
Right. Thank you for your elaboration, Matt. It's very useful, very inspiring. Ms. Tiza, do you want to comment on that as well?
Not on the minerals, but the other one.
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Just the question on, do I focus on individual action or systemic change? Both. Do both. Because you need to understand how hard it is to change your individual action. Because you need to be able to voice that difficulty is because the system doesn't support it. And once you voice that, you'll understand what it is about the system that needs to change. So you do need to do both. And as a result, your life will be more difficult. But it will become more meaningful.
More expensive.
It will become more meaningful, and I speak from personal experience. On a side note, I would like to thank Pak Gita for reminding me to write a book.
Wow.
I think that should be a worthy endeavor for everyone to tell their stories, whether that's through writing a book, or whether that's through advocacy, or whether that's through just pushing through what it is that you want about the system that needs to change. And if you need a friend to churhat with, I'm here. Thanks.
Thank you, Tiza. Yes, just commenting to Tiza's point, Pak Gita is writing a book. It's called What It Takes. What?
Written, not writing.
Is writing a book. Written.
I've written a book.
Oh, so you have published it
It's
already?
being finalized, copy edited. It'll get out.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm not writing. I have written. It'll
Yes.
hit the bookstores in September. Please
Right.
buy. It's cheap.
Yes.
$8.
$8.
I didn't sign up with a university press because they wanted me to sell it at $40. All of you can't afford it.
Wow.
But $8, all of you can afford 2 books.
Woo! That's a great deal, Pak. Thank you. And there is a part about sustainability there. So if you are interested on sustainability, please consider to buy the book. Yeah. Pak Gita?
I can spend days and weeks on sustainability, but I don't have much time. But on the lady's question, I've had some experience in policy and politics. So I have some authority in talking about political realism. I may not be the most authoritative, but I have some authority. It's important to understand that there's 4 economic phenomena. First is the rising inequality of wealth. Second is the rising inequality of income. The third is the rising inequality of opportunities. And the fourth is the rising centripetalism of economic development, meaning the primary cities are enjoying economic growth at a faster and higher acceleration as compared to the secondary, much less regional cities. These 4 economic phenomena are further polarizing ideas. Spectrum, whatever spectrum, political, social, cultural. So what happens as ideas get polarized, you go to the far left, you go to the far right. Centrality and center are diminished. What happens? The guy on the left needs to campaign with a message of hope. If you believe me, I'm going to build solar panels because we're going to be able to decarbonize. But the problem with the guys on the left, while conveying the message of hope, it requires credibility. The moment somebody finds out that you plagiarized when you were a sophomore in college, there goes your credibility. There goes your message of hope. The guys on the right, they campaign on a message of fear and or intimidation. If you don't vote for me, they're going to rob you. They're going to rape you. They're going to destroy you. They don't question whether you plagiarized in college. It doesn't require credibility. So it is almost inevitable from a political and geopolitical standpoint that the calculus will shift to the right. The more it shifts to the right, the narrative of sustainability will diminish. You have to understand that realism, political and geopolitical realism. So the way to address this is to structurally remedy those four economic phenomena. Unfortunately, it's proven quite empirically that the internet, which was the greatest democratizer of information, has not been a commensurate democratizer of ideas, much less economic capital. And now we're seeing AI that I think is going to further exacerbate the pre-existing elitized economic order. And we're also seeing an increasing bifurcation of technological innovation being ushered by China and the West. Any kind of bifurcation is only going to be inflationary. That's not going to be great for the global South. We're still members of the global South, most parts of Southeast Asia. So just be mindful of that when you're talking about sustainability without being able to remedy the most structural issues with regards to economic phenomena. I think we're all exposed. Now with respect to the critical minerals, I don't know where you grew up, man. You sound like somebody from the UK, right? And all I can say is FDI is the only way out. I've already talked to you about the lack of money supply. The money supply to GDP ratio in Indonesia is only 45% of the GDP. It's low. Modern developed economies run at a ratio of higher than 200%. This explains why the banking assets to GDP ratio at only 45%. This explains why the capital markets to GDP ratio is only at about 45 to 50%, because there's not much money. So the only way out is to get money from overseas, not through grants. I agree with TISA. But you got to get it through FDI. But if you don't deliver the rule of law, you're not going to get it because they don't believe you. And if you don't translate uncertainties into risk that can be priced, they're not going to send money here. The FDI on a per capita per year basis for 9 countries in Southeast Asia range between $100 to $400. That's the ability of the average citizen in Southeast Asia to attract FDI outside Singapore. You know what Singapore's ability to attract FDI on a per capita per year basis? $20,000. I'll repeat. Singapore, $20,000 per capita per year. Indonesia at $100. Okay? And if you think that's the relative assessment, not the absolute assessment, you're dead wrong. The absolute assessment, Singapore gets $140 billion. Indonesia gets $30 billion. So unless and until you improve upon the wherewithal to translate uncertainties into risks, to uphold the rule of law, you can kiss any kind of narrative on sustainability. So the only way out is to lower that 88% of households having no tertiary or university education to 0. When you have better educated citizenry and populace, then you can start talking about nobility. So the FDI will be required and essential for you to move up the value chain as it relates to base metals, precious metals, noble metals, and rare earth. You can build all the factories in the world so that you can vertically integrate from the hulu to the hilir, from the upstream to the downstream. Without that academic, educational attainment, without that ability to translate uncertainties into risk, without the ability to uphold rule of law, this is unfortunately just going to be a little too academic. You need to infuse realism. And this is coming from somebody who's seen both sides of the equation, academia and real politics and real economies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please. Thank you so much, Pak Gita, for putting everything into perspective. We still would like to talk a lot more, but time is up, unfortunately. One thing is clear, opportunity still exists, but deafness matters. Pak Gita, deafness matters. And with that, we have reached the end of this inspiring and informative panel session. Thank you all once again for your wonderful engagement. And now, I would like to invite our panelists, and I would like you to join me in giving a warm round of applause to our esteemed panelists one more time. All right. Now I would like to invite our panelists to remain on stage for a brief group photos and souvenir handover as a token for appreciation.
Do we get an iPhone?
Yeah. Yes, would like that, Pak.
Panelists, panelists, we invite you to stand on the front of the table
Oh, yeah, Pak.
for us to give the souvenirs, please. Proceed. Yeah. Yeah, we can start giving it, Alice. We're inviting the documentation team to go on the spot. The photo session, I will help with the guide. I will guide the photo session. Is the team ready? Yeah. Okay, on the count of 3, ready? Please show your best smile and also the souvenir to the camera in the middle. So on my count, 1, 2, 3. Once again, 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much for our distinguished panelists for giving this insightful session. We'd like to invite all the panelists to be guided by the license officers to leave the room. Information to all of the attendees, we are having our closing plenary in the ballroom.